I am Meenal. I am one of the coordinators of Sangat, a Feminist Network. And before I proceed with the session, and introduce the session and the speakers of the session, I will lay down a few ground rules which will help us all to have a smooth session for the next 2 hours. The first rule is obviously, like I said, kindly ensure that your microphone and your video remains turned off throughout the session. And I'm also requesting the panelists to kindly turn off their mic when they're not speaking. Also, please ensure that your videos are also turned off because that really destabilizes the connection. We have a lot of people here. Please be advised that if we notice etc., we will be disabling the audio and video for the participant. And in case of consistent disturbances, we will be removing said participant. The last half an hour of the session will be dedicated to questions. Kindly leave your questions in the chat box. As we have a lot of participants, we will request you to keep the questions specific to the topic being discussed and pertaining only to the themes that speakers address in their talk. Kindly refrain from making general observations and comments to avoid crowding the chat box because I will be picking up the questions from this chat box and addressing it to the speakers. I mean, Diti and I will be doing that. So please avoid crowding the chat box and keep your questions specific. Again, I will request you to please be mindful that your questions are respectful, and please be advised that we will be removing participants who indulge in hate speech or make any kind of offensive remarks. Last but not the least, please, we would like to let you know that this session is being recorded and it is also being live streamed on Facebook on our Facebook page. A recording of the session will be sent to our networks. If you are not on our subscription list and would like to receive a recording, kindly write us at sangat.sangat@jagori.org. Alternatively, you can follow us on Facebook, where you can find us at Sangat Network, where a video of this session will be available. So today's session is co-organized by Feminist Multilogues and Sangat Network. Feminist Multilogues is a Delhi-based voluntary group that meets monthly in Kamla Bhasin's basement to discuss contemporary feminist issues. And a big shout out to every member of this amazing group. And thanks to them for agreeing to open our usually closed sessions for this topic. This session was planned to be held in March, but due to obvious reasons, we have now moved it online and have also opened it to the larger public. For those of you joining for the first time, Sangat is a network of organizations and individuals working for gender justice. Our focus is on building and strengthening a regional South Asian feminist solidarity through capacity building and campaigning. So moving on to the session at hand, today we have some stalwarts of the feminist movement, and they will be discussing religion, faith, and feminist thought. They will explore the many ways in which feminists have engaged with organized religion as well as personal faith. So this session actually promises engaging, and the speakers for this session are Uma Chakravarty and Syeda Hameed, and the session will be moderated by Kamla Bhasin. I will now proceed to give a brief introduction of the speakers as well as the moderator. So Uma Chakravarty is a pillar of the women's rights movement, and she has also been engaged in a lot of movements for democratic rights. She used to teach history at Miranda House, Delhi, full-time between 1966 and 1998, and then part-time in an honorary capacity until 2006. She has written extensively on early India, the 19th century, and on contemporary issues such as violence within the family, custodial violence, sexual violence, and impunity. As part of her lifelong engagement with the everyday histories of women, she has recently turned filmmaker and has made 5 films on different subjects dealing with how social and political influences have shaped women's lives at different junctures. She lives and works in Delhi. Dr. Syeda Hameed is a former member of the Planning Commission of India and former member of the National Commission for Women. She is a feminist and a writer who is widely recognized for her passionate engagement in public affairs and social issues, especially for women, minorities, and peace. She has been tremendously influential in collecting and carrying the issues of Muslim women to government, civil society, and religious bodies. She's also the founder member of the Muslim Women's Forum. She was awarded the Padma Shri in 2007. Okay, as I said, this session will be moderated by Kamla Bhasin. So last but not the least, Kamla Bhasin is a South Asian feminist activist. She worked with the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations in South Asia for 27 years. She is a founder member of Jagori, as well as founder and advisor of Sangat, a feminist network. She has conducted countless gender trainings for government bodies, international NGOs, and regularly speaks at colleges and schools. She has written extensively on gender, patriarchy, and feminism in the South Asian context. So those were my introductions of the speaker. I will now proceed to invite Kamla to take the session forward. But before I do that, I will request every participant to please be mindful and kindly please don't unmute yourselves, and please leave your questions in the chat box. I can see that the chat box has already received some hundreds of comments, but please avoid crowding the chat box, and please let it be only for some really specific questions that you would like the speakers to address towards the end of the session. That's all I have to say. And yeah, Kamla, please take this session forward. Hello. All right, it seems that Kamla Bhasin is not online. Let me just check. Her internet was a little unstable, so it is possible. Yeah, so she is disconnected. So I will now invite, while I try to get her back, I will invite Uma ji to please speak about, to start the session with her talk. So we'll skip Kamla's part and then we'll move to Uma Chakravarty. Uma ji, can you please start now?
Okay. Well, I wasn't ready to begin without the opening comments, but be that as it may, one has to stand in. I will, whatever time she comes on, we can have her pitch in. I can't even see Syeda, so you need to check whether she's gone off also.
I can see her. She's here.
Okay.
I will just have her reconnect.
Right. So I'm going to actually do something. You'll notice, all of you, that the three of us are that first generation of the feminists who perhaps had to deal with a complex bunch of issues in which we may or may not have immediately got into the discussion of, addressed directly questions of religion, faith, and feminist thought. But over a period of time, these are questions that we have addressed. And so I will draw from my experience of the early women's movement and proceed also to try and bring to you let's say the manner in which some of these complex issues were addressed, not only by some of us, but by a whole range of people who were moved by the women's movement to actually engage in different arenas of feminist politics and feminist thinking. And the critical area of religion as it played out in history is something that a large number of women did get involved with. Particularly academics, I find, would go back to history. And since I'm a historian, history is going to underpin everything that I say. Now, let me begin by saying that the first generation of feminists, and I speak for myself, but I also speak for, say, perhaps a number of senior, my age kind of feminists and around that time, we had a certain unease about religion, because we didn't actually, for us, religion came in a package along with culture and patriarchy. In fact, religion and patriarchy was difficult to disentangle from each other. So actually, religion is something that, in a sense, provided substratum of culture, And culture was very much a part of the way in which the question of patriarchy was pitched. So in a sense, the difficulty for a lot of us was, in a sense, we were, by instinct, we moved away from religion. And I think we tried to see ourselves as not only secular because it's modern, and I don't believe that. I think many of us came from an understanding that these three came as a package: religion, patriarchy, and culture. They were entangled together, and it was very difficult to take out one strand and say, we're going to deal only with patriarchy without having to deal with culture or religion at the same time. So in a sense, I think intuitively we became people who were critical of the manner in which patriarchy was sought to be underpinned always by religion, by, even more complicatedly, by culture. So culture was like this huge, huge area, which everything would come under that. And that would be seen as, in a sense, explaining a number of unequal practices, which of course we were not going to, we were struggling against. So in a sense, by instinct, we may not have been very clear that we are atheist or agnostic, or but there was a kind of secular position, and by secular I mean that we stood outside the realm of religion as we engaged with, we didn't, not completely outside the realm of religion, but while we engaged with patriarchy, we constantly saw religion and culture holding up patriarchy. And so to that extent, I think there was a kind of intuitive rebelliousness with which we address the question of religion. Now, over a period of time, everyone will be familiar with the fact that what I call the thekedars of religion, the thekedars, who are the people who seek to interpret religion, they've always been men, and they have a stake in upholding the whole structure without actually allowing us to rip open or take out the threads and say, okay, this is religion, this is culture, this is patriarchy. It was extremely, as I said, extremely difficult for us to do. So in a sense, we intuitively became certainly secular, and and we didn't quite engage with issues of the spirit, and I mean spiritual in a deep sense, which is not actually to do with institutionalized religion at all, institutionalized structures of religion. There are a lot of people who actually are deeply spiritual, who may not fall within any of the structures of religious institutional bases, or even religious, formal religious ideas. So to that extent, I think it's important to keep in mind that we, and questions of the spirit, questions of the deep engagement with spiritual issues were not something that was straight away something that we engage with. But over a period of time, as far as I can see, and particularly for those of us who are practicing feminists, as well as practicing historians, we constantly delved back into the past. And one of the things that we were confronted with straight away is that all of these institutionalized religions originated after patriarchy had come into existence. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say to you is that it's the enmeshing of these three, patriarchy, culture, and religion, was kind of natural, because patriarchy was already in place by the time institutionalized religions as we now know them, say for instance, whether it's Christianity, even Buddhism, which predates that, or Islam, or many of the other reformist traditions, these have grown after the consolidation of patriarchy. The institutionalization of patriarchy actually goes back to at least roughly 2000, 2500 years ago. If you read Gerda Lerner's Creation of Patriarchy, you will see how old and stable patriarchy is as an institution. So the point I'm trying to reiterate is that, in a sense, the chance to be standing for religion to stand outside patriarchy was a bit difficult because patriarchy was already in place. And so anything that came afterwards, including the kind of culture that you created, factored in inequality between men and women, and sometimes deep inequality between men and women, and the exclusion of women, certainly from thinking, from conceptualizing, and feminist thought, to some extent, never got its own organic capacity to reproduce itself because almost invariably, religious texts could sometimes be critiqued, but they would never, those criticisms would never, those new conceptualizations would never be able to circulate because the syllabus was always in the hands of men, institutionalized structures. And so it was actually very difficult to reproduce even say critiques of the, so from very early on, for instance, there were critiques of the Bible. And Gerda Lerner shows us that. But each generation, new generation, simply made the same criticism of the Bible as the earlier generation, because the first generation's women never went into knowledge and its circulation because they never were given the status of canonical authority. So as a consequence, there was a repetitive quality to whatever they said, and it never became too advanced. So in a sense, the relationship between knowledge and religious thinking is also very important, because what is allowed to circulate is only, again, what the patriarchal men decide is going to circulate. And it is a problem that I will address as we proceed in my presentation. So I will now, but also the other strange thing is that even the critiques of patriarchy, even the critiques of formally acknowledging the manner in which religion was being interpreted, only existed in religious texts. And this is partly to do with the fact that knowledge, particularly in South Asia maybe, and was reproduced by and large in religious texts, because it is only religious texts or Brahmanical texts or Buddhist texts which actually sustained, and it was only those went into the next generation. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that the textual tradition itself was a limited one. It circulated only in certain texts. And so it was actually very difficult to say, were there other kinds of rebellious women who did other things, because they have not been included in the corpus of the knowledge system that we passed on from one generation to another. So these are problems that we'll have to keep in mind when I ask you to go on this journey with me, in which we see how then did women seek to claim a space in a religious structure which was already informed by patriarchy. And so how did they actually do that? So you'll find that, and I will take you through a short journey, not a very long one, because there isn't that much time. But I'll begin with Buddhism, and then I'll go on to other strands. So let me begin with Buddhism. Now, it's well known, and Buddhist countries all around us, for instance, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, even other parts of Korea and so on, they're all actually, they they're already embedded in that patriarchal society. And so in a sense, the unequal power between men and women, and the fact that there is a certain social formation in which gender inequality is already in place. So, women don't inherit property, all of this package is also there. Huh? So there is an unequal set of social relations. So not only is there difference between men and men, but there's deep differences between men and women. So in that situation, how do you then prize open even a new tradition that is beginning to emerge? So Buddhism today is very patriarchal across these places, and I'll have occasion to go back to that. But even at that time, when it was still in the formation, people might know that institutionally what the Buddha created in the form of the Sangha was confined to the male. Because at the heart of the religious project was the male monk. And celibacy was something that was put in his lot, because one of the things that the Buddha did very clearly was to separate the world of the laity from the world of the monks. And so the Sangha, which actually was in a sense the think tank of Buddhism at that point of time, was initially allowed only to men. So they are the ones who created the institution of the Sangha, and it was confined to the monks. And many of you will know that from your reading or from popular understanding, that women had to launch a huge struggle in trying to say, we too should be let into the Sangha. The Sangha should be made accessible to us also. And people know the story of Buddha's foster mother, the one who brought him up actually after his own biological mother died, wanting to enter the Sangha when she was in her older years and being denied permission to join the Sangha. Now, she followed the Buddha wherever he went. And every time there was a halt, she would try and put this arzi to him, this petition to him, saying we should be allowed to join the Sangha. And the mediator was often Ananda. Ananda is the Buddha's cousin. He's the soft guy in his time. He's also, to my mind, the first male feminist as recorded. I don't know about, there must have been lots of other people, but Ananda is recorded as someone who's always consistently pleading the case of women. He himself is a very soft guy. So he keeps arguing and saying, they want to enter the Sangha, let them in, and the Buddha is saying no. Now, I want to present for you that there have been many interpretations of these episodes later on. Ambedkar makes a very radical reinterpretation of this entire Buddhist early history. But my own explanation is that actually the Sangha is misogynist. All religious traditions are misogynist at that time, and they put words into the Buddha's mouth, at least that, if not, this is not the Buddha's own voice, in order to give authority to the patriarchal bias of saying women are not to be allowed to enter the Sangha. However, Ananda persists, as you might know, and finally, at some point, he asked this critical question to the Buddha. He said, if they strive, if they work at it, can they achieve the goal of nirvana? Can they achieve the final goal of liberation, which is what the Buddhist monk is looking for? And the Buddha says yes. So when he says yes, then Ananda says, then you have to let them in, because only the monk at that time was entitled to actually achieving full nirvana status, because only he had cut himself off from the world in a certain kind of way. And that is the argument by which, if they strive and they can do it, then you have to let them in. And finally, the Buddha lets them in. Now, I won't go into much more than this, but what is most striking about the Buddhist text is that there is also a set of verses created by the Buddhist bhikkhunis, which actually describe almost in very contemporary terms, what they understand to be the gendered division of labor and the fact that women are allotted the role of householding and social reproduction, basically cooking, cleaning, and nurturing babies. And that's their allotted task, whereas the men are in that other sphere. And one of the interesting elements of Buddhist, of these bhikkhunis, is they actually describe what later on people have understood as a really fantastic criticism of what is called kitchenism. That is, consigning women to the kitchen and doing kitchen duty, that is cooking, cleaning, and social reproduction, bearing children. That's the job of women. And they, in their beautiful verses that they create after they join the Sangha and they sit and meditate and gain knowledge, is to actually condemn that life and say, we don't want to have anything to do with that life, which is to say, there's actually a criticism of sil batte ki zindagi, that is the grinding stone. You spend a lot of time, grinding the corn, grinding whatever it is. And that is actually described by some of the bhikkhunis in their verses. They also describe the sense of liberty that they get when they finally actually enter the Sangha, sit down to meditate, and are able to expand their sense of self. So there's a very moving account of a bhikkhuni who is sitting and meditating under a tree, and the bad evil force man, Mara, comes and says, what are you doing sitting over here? All you need is knowledge. She says she's meditating. He says, all you need is the knowledge of two-finger consciousness, it's called, picking up a grain of rice in your two fingers and seeing whether it's cooked or not. That is actually the only allotted duty of women. That's the amount of knowledge they need. And sharp as anything comes her response, and she says, what shall I do with that? I am looking for space. I'm looking for the expanded self. So actually from very early on, women have had what I consider to be the basis of feminist thinking, which is to say, we're not going to live under a patriarchal regime in which we are downgraded, allotted a lower role, and only consigned to certain kinds of tasks. So there's a critique of patriarchy, and as it develops, ultimately you'll see that institutionalized religion of whatever kind it is tends to fix these tropes upon women and not give them the space that today we may naturalize as something that was accessible to them. So what I'm trying to say is that it's been a struggle throughout history, to actually access knowledge of the self, and knowledge and autonomy, and to achieve a level of autonomy over yourself. Because as I see it, feminism is really not about ruling over anybody else. It's about achieving autonomy of your own power and your own notion of who you are and where you want to be. So to that extent, I think it's a very powerful example that we have in the form of the Buddhist bhikkhunis. So there is what I'm trying to say is that there is a critique of patriarchy even in that. Now you'll find over a period of time, even Buddhist countries have actually returned to that unequalness. Famously, my friend Kumari Jayawardena said, you are talking about a Buddhism which is like in the texts. Actually, if you look at what's happening in Sri Lanka, by that time they were not even enrolling bhikkhunis any longer, on the ground that they didn't have any bhikkhunis to enroll the next generation. So, everywhere patriarchy returned to cover up the searches of women, their very spiritual searches, and overlay them and accommodate them and domesticate them within patriarchy. So the search for a different notion of the self has been as old as the inequality of gender. And that women have never accepted that they are secondary human beings. or that they have to perform roles only which are allotted to them by society. So that's I think an important question around. And they negotiated this themselves. Fortunately, the institution of the Sangha, which they finally joined, was able to give them the space to be able to sit and do what they wanted, that is, pursue their religious existences. So in that sense, I think that example is powerful and important in saying nothing comes to you easily, you have to struggle. And but I also want to begin by, I want to mark a very important point. One of the things about Buddhism and its core beliefs is that it does not actually go into the question of, is there a God or is there not a God? That's not a question that the Buddha found very useful. He calls it one of the 10 avyaktanis. Avyaktani is a futile question. And his example, which is very powerful, which I think, therefore, we are able to draw upon, is that he says, when a man is hit by an arrow, you do not ask whether it came from the north, south, east, or west. You pluck it out to give the man relief. So as far as he's concerned, the problem with human existence is the suffering. That is what has to be solved as a problem, rather than saying, is there a God, is there no God, and what does he say, what is that structure? So in a sense, I think the space for asking certain kinds of questions and living certain kinds of experiences perhaps provided in that early example. But we also know that patriarchy definitely undergirds the institution of the Sangha, and they are made unequal, and that's not a happy situation. So in the end, as I said, historically, patriarchy exists, and therefore it always tends to overcome whatever strand of religious experiment or searches that you seek in. I'll jump quickly to bhakti, particularly early and slightly later medieval bhakti, which actually did give a lot of space to women to, and all these experiments you can see are either taking place within the religious domain or they are being recorded and passed on by the religious textual tradition. So I don't know if there were non-religious experiments and criticisms and experiments to critique patriarchy from the outside, but here what you see is very powerfully in the bhakti tradition is that women, housewives, there is a very big challenge. They do seek a life of the spirit. I'll put it like that, a life of the spirit. They seek it, some of them access it. But there is a great tension between women who are wives and men who are in the bhakti tradition. They have to straddle this whole thing of the household again, the back to the household responsibilities. But there are very powerful examples from medieval times, which is actually very important historically from our point of view, because whatever was stultifying in religion, including caste underpinning Hinduism, is something that finds its own criticism from the thinking beings that come from everywhere. And this is coming from men and women, and they are part of a movement in which you are actually trying to return to basic questions around the relationship between perhaps you and God, okay? I mean, the fundamental question between the individual and God, and they seek to define it and redefine it in very interesting ways. So you're all familiar, I don't need to go into these examples, but there's Akka Mahadevi, who does the ultimate, which is throws off her clothes and wonders because she says there is nothing between. I mean, like, in a sense, she takes on the world, including the world of violence, as something that cannot actually overcome her spiritual quest. And she proceeds. There's Meera, there's a whole series of examples of women who seek their own understanding of the spiritual path and the journey to achieving a sense of their own understanding of the life of the spirit. I'll put it like that. So again, I'm sure many of you will know these examples, so I don't have to labor this point that much. I will quickly move to the 19th century. Now, you know, in the 19th century was a time of great experiment, and the men were all, many of the men were actually redefining their relationship. I need to just quickly flag one thing, which is Hinduism became so enmeshed in the idea of caste that it was actually difficult to extricate caste from Hinduism. That's been the running problem of anyone who's trying to be, let's say, trying to stay within a different sense of equality and inequality. But anyway, now in the 19th century, a lot of the men experimented, and you know that they created traditions, like they created institutions like the Brahmo Samaj, the Pratna Samaj, and so on. And they sort of sought to purge Hinduism of its negative characteristics. So it's not as if, say, men have always agreed with everything that has come down to them also. Some of them were certainly not comfortable with the manner in which that religious tradition was being accessed and reproduced, and, you know, and being interpreted again by powerful figures, which meant that the common people did not have the kind of, ordinary people did not necessarily have the choices that they, you know, could have experimented with. Now, in roughly at the same time, that in the middle of the 19th and towards the 1880s, you also have this figure called Pandita Ramabai, who's born a Brahmana woman. She has an unusual life because her father doesn't get her married off when she's young. And she is very much a part of the spiritual quest of her family, which goes from one place to another. And it's teaching Puranic stories, and it's living in the fashion that, you know, you live off the community, as it were. Now, at some point, Ramabai, who has never read the Vedas, she knows Sanskrit, but she never has read the Vedas, begins to look at the texts, the textual tradition. And at some point in her life, widowed and single and alone, she decides that she's going to convert. She's moved by the figure of Christ, and she converts to Christianity. And the line that she uses, the argument that she uses to say, in Christ there is neither male nor female. Now, this is a passing line, perhaps, in the Christian tradition, but she picks on that, and she sees this as more equal, and she chooses to enter Christianity. She converts to Christianity. Now, of course, she enters a situation which is already loaded, and there are the Christian thekedars just as much as there are anybody else, and they are going to police her. So one of the interesting things that she does, that Ramabai does, is to argue against patriarchy within Christianity. So she at some point is going to go off and teach Englishmen Marathi, the Marathi language, and the Archbishop in Punjab turns around and says she can't do that because she will not be accepted back in India if she does that. And she gets furious and she says, do you know your country better? Do you know my country better or do I know it? And my mother taught me, so there's no question that I'm not going to, she's going to accept a gendered position in the world of knowledge, and she refuses to. When she's in a confrontation, she resorts to what she calls, my inner voice told me. And she shuts up everybody with that. My inner voice told me. And that's the end of the argument. And she does as she pleases. So in a sense, women seek to find a manner in which they can actually interpret. It doesn't have to be one religion over another. But in a sense, it's also interesting that they seek to stay with their own understanding of both the spiritual quest, as well as actually not accepting patriarchal society with its inequality and hierarchy of things. And I'll just end with the final example of Urmila Pawar, who joins, she is part of the Ambedkarite Buddhist conversion movement. And she describes very powerfully how the families, the Mahar families that joined Ambedkar in that 1956 conversion, handled their new moment, that is their transformed status, as exiting Hinduism, which was oppressive and underpinned caste, and entering the Buddhism. But she is a very powerful account in which she describes how they did not, sort of do any harm to the gods and goddesses that they used to keep in their homes and used to worship up until that time. They took these gods and goddesses, which were no longer part of the way they were going to think and believe, and they floated it down on the river. That is, rivers are always sacred. So they put it into the river. And I think it's a very interesting way in which you exit Hinduism, you enter Buddhism, but you also say, okay, I'm doing this for myself. This is what suits me. This is what makes me feel good. This is what makes my community feel good. And you follow this path of not disrespecting anybody. So I just want to end, because I think I've taken a fair amount of time. I just want to end because there's a lot that we have to still deal with, and Kamla needs to come in at some point. And so, of course, there's Syeda ji. I think there are no easy formulas, but there are some ground rules. I believe there are some ground rules. I don't think that the problem that women's quest for the spiritual is a problem for any feminist. Why should it be? I mean, you are emancipating your spirit, not reducing it. But there are some ground rules, I think. And those ground rules should actually include that you can't actually compromise on questions of, there should be no hatred. You can't accept inequality. You cannot accept, so a feminist relationship to faith, to my mind, whether it's personal or collective, must also in some ways be in consonance with the broader agenda of the feminists, which is to actually create a world without oppression. To create, and not only gendered oppression, but other kinds of oppression also are things that feminists stand against. And I think that in the end, you may find a collective, you may not be able to find a collective, and it may just be a case of ekla chalo ro. That is, it's an individual journey that you go on, and and that's something that's for you to decide, and that's for you to do. And I don't think that way of looking at feminist at religion is a problem at all for feminist thinking, because it is really about emancipating women on all fronts. So I'll stop at that.
Thank you, Uma ji, very much you really got it from history, and then you spoke a lot about, wove a lot of threads in this. Kamla Di is now online, so I will now ask Kamla Di to please come in, and because she was not here before, a big part of the introduction was missing. So I would request Kamla Di to please come in now and just share her thoughts on what this session is, and also on Uma ji's talk. Hello. I guess, I can see her, but Kamla Di, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. No. All right, I'm sorry for this inconvenience. Just wait for 2 minutes. All right, then I guess we will not hear from, it seems. Yes, we can hear you now, Kamla Di. Hello? Just a second. All right. Hold on just for 2 minutes, people. I will see what is the problem. Okay. All right. I guess instead of calling Kamladi, we will figure it out with her later. But instead of holding on to all of you also and delaying this session even more, I will now invite Syeda ji to please present her thoughts. Okay, Syeda ji, you're on mute. I'll just unmute you. Yeah. Syeda ji, you'll have to unmute yourself. Just on the bottom left corner, there will be a microphone. Yeah, yeah. All right. Okay. Just a second. Okay. Syeda ji, your audio is not working. Can you see that a small microphone on the left corner? It's there. All right. Okay. Just a second.
Can you now? Is it better?
Yes. Yes. Exactly. I can hear you. We can all hear you now.
So
That's
many. Okay. Thank you very much, Meenal, and I'm really honored to be here today. And I'm afraid, Uma, because I had no bijli, so I missed at least a good 10 minutes of what you were saying, or even more. So it's totally my deprivation. And of course, very unfortunate that Kamla was not here, because we've been talking about this for such a long time, and how are we going to do it. As Meenal said, you know, it was all going to happen in March in her basement, but you know, for very uncompromising reasons. So here we are today on the 13th of June, meeting on this very, very important subject. And Uma has given a very comprehensive, very deeply scholarly talk. And mine is going to be quite simple, relatively speaking, and not that long either, because I would rather, you know, because I would rather respond to any kind of interventions and questions. So just to begin, let me just begin with myself. And Kamla is back, and I've hardly begun. So, Kamla is really playing a game now. She's again here again. She was here a minute ago and gone again. So now we'll just carry on as if, you know, even if she comes back, we'll just carry on. So I have to begin with myself. I am a hello.
Yes, Syeda ji, please continue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Meenal and friends, I'm a believing, practicing Muslim, and I have to tell you why am I a believing, practicing Muslim? Because as a child, I grew up in a in a very believing, liberal, open-minded, and a very secular household, who explained Islam to me in a sense that there was nothing more egalitarian, there was nothing more liberal, there was nothing more eclectic than Islam. And but the important thing was I was never forced to do anything. I mean, apart from the ritual of, being taught the namaz, being taught the Quran, being asked to at least fast once, which was a big celebration when a child of 8 or 9 does the first roza during the month of Ramadan. It's a very big celebration. All of that. But after that, there was no compulsion. And I think the Quran says the very important line of the Quran, which I think everybody, regardless of what faith you profess, has to understand and imbibe. And that is La Ikra Fid Deen, which is there is no compulsion in religion. And it's right out of the Quran. It's not from any intermediary or any kind of a gatekeeper or custodian. It's right from the book itself. So because there was no compulsion, I went through life exactly doing things in a very casual way till a certain point in my life when I needed, when my life was falling to pieces and I needed something as a tether. And I started looking at Islam and looking at religion and not just listening to others, but trying to discover and find it out for myself. And that is when I found out that the Quran says that God is closer to you than your jugular vein. This exactly is another word out of the Quran. The word is shehrag. And the expression is Allah Ta'ala tumse tumhari shehrit rag se zyada nazdeek hai. So some power which is so close to you understands and in a way is part of you. And so I began to, on my own, without any outer compulsion, I began to restart my engagement with Islam and with religion. And this was so many years ago, like in the early 70s, it again started for me. And to this day, there has been no wavering. And I have been also, in a sense, so violated by the fact of how Islam has been completely and totally misunderstood across the globe. And for that, I think we Muslims are definitely, we are in the dock for that. We have not, for example, we have not impressed upon the world that Islam is a religion that actually at that time, 1437 years ago, that spoke about equality between men and women. And I took out one surah, small, not a surah, but a small portion of the Quran, which I thought I could even read it out to you. It's really short. But basically what it means is that equality between the sexes. And the background of that is that when, the Prophet's mosque is called the Masjid-e-Nabawi, which is the first mosque of Islam. When the Prophet did the Hijrat from Makkah to Medina, he was driven out of Makkah because he was professing a religion that was very revolutionary, where the girl child was buried at birth. He was professing a religion which would give property rights to the girl child right from the word go. So such a man was a great threat to the political order. So he was driven out of Makkah and he went to Medina. And that is the beginning of the Islamic calendar, which is called the Hijri. The Hijri is the first year of Hijri, was not when the Islam was revealed, but when the Prophet made the journey from Makkah to Medina. And friends, the important thing is that, just to talk about gender for just a minute, and the surah, this part of the Surah Al-Ahzab, it's called Surah Al-Ahzab, which is very important, which talks of the equality of men and women. That Surah Al-Ahzab, how was it revealed? The Quran was not revealed like, it's a revealed book, but it was not like revealed, one book descended from the heaven or the verses descended. It was revealed in bits and pieces. It was revealed in small passages and committed to memory at that time. So when the women, there was a time reserved by the Prophet in the Masjid al-Nabawi, which was the Prophet's mosque, which is today the most expensive and the most grand and the most, completely mind-boggling monument in the world. It was simply a very simple mud structure. And that is really the simplicity of Islam, in which there was a time which was designated for women, when women could come and engage with dialogue with the Prophet and ask the Prophet questions which were bothering them, the questions that arose in their mind. That was a moment. So during that period, women used to come and ask, and one of the Prophet's wife was a woman called Salama. Salama asked the Prophet, Ya Rasulallah, O Prophet, why is it there is so much for men in the Quran and there is nothing for us women? So this sentence is a historical record in Tabari, and the Prophet listened to her, and that was when Surah Al-Nisa descended. Surah Al-Nisa is the fourth surah of the Quran, and Al-Nisa, as some of you know, means women. This is the second longest surah of the Quran. The Quran is a very unevenly divided book. There are surahs which are 6 or 8 or 10 lines, and there are surahs which are 60, 50, 55, 60 pages long. So this is the second largest surah of the Quran, which is all about the rights of women. And all the questions that we have about women in Islam, I would say, for me, the answer lies in the word of Allah, which is contained in the Quran and which speaks of the equality of men and women. And the fact that for men and women who practice, who give in charity, who have empathy, who have care for their fellow beings, God has an equal reward. So this is, to me, that was very important. So when I read the Quran in the light of two mentors of mine, and they both happen to be men. Yes, you can say, why not women? And I have no answer to that, but they both happen to be men. One was a man who was the first feminist poet of this country. He lived 170 years ago, and he wrote about the rights of women at that time. And he wrote it in the light of the Quran, and he was also a Maulana. His name was Maulana Altaf Hussain Hali. I grew up in his shadow, in the shadow of his writings, and my other mentor who taught me what really the essence of the Quran was a man who I consider the greatest scholar of the Quran, and also of many other subjects, a man called Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Both Maulanas, both very liberal, both extremely critical of orthodox tendencies, most critical of the people who claim to be custodians of the religion, openly critical of that, and speaking about the humane, the gendered, and the gentle face of Islam. And I just want to say that when I realized that, and then I, of course, started engaging. Initially, when I began my work on various official capacities, I wrote the first report, in this country on the status of Muslim women called Be Aawazon Ki Awaaz, Voice of the Voiceless, Status of Muslim Women in India. Having studied that extensively to a ring, I engaged with the Maulana, the Mullah, the scholars who claim to are self-professed custodians of Islam. I spoke about gender. I tried to impress upon them that this image of Islam is going to stand us in a very bad light across the globe. And some understood and some did not understand. But my struggle went on and on and on until there was a moment when I became, and Kamla asked me to mention it, so I'm mentioning it, otherwise I may not have mentioned, that I became the first woman Qazi to perform the nikah. No woman ever performed. I think it was back in 2007 or in Lucknow that I performed it. And I asked an uncle of mine who is now passed on, I said, look, I'm going to do this. Is there anything inimical to it? And he said, there is nothing inimical to it. All you need to do is just ensure Islamic marriage is a contract. It's nothing, no religious, there is no ritual. You can dispense with every ritual. There are only two factors in an Islamic marriage. One is that you have to have a meher. And a meher is a way of ensuring protection for the girl, the woman who's getting married in terms of a settlement. And the second requirement that you cannot get away from is that you have to have witnesses, because no contract is valid without witnesses. So I performed this. I did read a prayer or two, which I thought was appropriate for the occasion. And I presented the conditions of the nikah, and also Islam also allows any kind of conditionality to be written into the document, which is the legal binding document of the nikah nama. No matter what, you have to have that binding document. And all of this made me feel, this is a religion that I can say to my friends across the world that no religion at 1437, or now it must be more like 1440 years ago, ever gave property rights in the Quran, actually giving portions. And Kamla and I have discussed it, and Kamla, of course, understands it very well, that if the Quran at that time said that double share for the man and single share for the double share for the son and single share for the daughter, remember that it was a calibrated move. And the whole tragedy of this the way Islam is looked at, so anti-gender, so patriarchal, is because ijtihad, which is the most wonderful thing, which is interpretation. Interpretation stopped at the time of the end of the reign of the four Khulafai Rashidin, the four caliphs after the Prophet's death. There were four caliphs, and interpretation went on. There were great jurists who interpreted fiqh in Islam, but at some point the doors of interpretation were locked and closed. So Islam showed a way, and we just, without actually moving forward on that trajectory, we just stopped. And so I say that if any entity is to be blamed for how the world looks upon Islam, I think we are squarely to be blamed. I can say this, I don't care if I'm declared by patriarchal custodians of religion as wajibul qatl. Wajibul qatl means deserving of being killed. I don't care, because people traditionally who have spoken out the truth from the depths of their understanding, whether they are the Sufis, whether they are the saints, whether they are the Prophet's own family, were always suffered and were actually in a sense, martyred in the most brutal fashion, but today the whole world remembers them. So this is the tradition of Islam. And I want to just say one more thing, because I'd like it if Kamla comes in, because I've rarely met anyone and who understands Islam and who has the, like sometimes I feel Ghalib said something and I should repeat. I told Kamla, I said, can I speak in Urdu, Hindi? She said, no, you have to speak in English. But if you have a couplet to recite, sure, you can recite it. So Ghalib said, and I applied this to Kamla, Ghalib said, देखिए तकरीर की लज्जत के जो उसने कहा. Look at the beauty of language and the spoken word, that what she spoke. देखिए तकदीर की लज्जत के जो उसने कहा, मैंने ये समझा कि गोया ये भी मेरे दिल में है. So what is in my heart, she speaks. So I very much would want her to engage in a dialogue with me, with Uma, who's of course a scholar, which I'm not. But she can operate, Kamla can operate on all levels. But I want to say just one more thing, and then I want to conclude. And that is, remember that the first person to convert and not convert, I should say, accept Islam, when the Prophet came from the cave of Hira, where the angel Gabriel gave him the first word of the Quran, which is read, the importance of education in Quran. He was like, he almost convulsed. It was such an awesome experience that he came to his house and he collapsed, where his wife Khatija held him. Now, this woman was a widow. She was 17 years older than him, and she was his boss. Okay, so all the three things which nobody would now even accept this kind of a match. So she held him in her arms, and the first person to accept Islam and recite the kalma. And remember, friends, the kalma only says that there is no God but one God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. That's it. That's the end of it. So when she recited that, so the first convert of Islam was a woman. The first person in Islam, the most revered person in Islam, was Fatima. Fatima, who was the Prophet's only one and only child, his daughter. And just to give you one little example, when she came into the room, he used to get up, and the riwayat is that he used to get up and he used to jhado his kamli, his blanket, and spread it for her to sit on. I mean, this is only one, there are thousands of others. So she was the first woman who had a greatest status in Islam. And the third person was Zainab. Zainab was her daughter, and when this incident of Karbala took place, when the enemies of Islam, mind you, they were all pre-Islamic, they all professed some kind of some shade of Islam, right? They were all Muslims. When those Muslims who were going to take Islam into the completely most adverse direction, when they fought the battle of Karbala with the Prophet's grandson Hussein, and killed and slaughtered everyone in Hussein's army, including the 6-month-old child Ali Asghar. It was Zainab who led the caravan. Although the Prophet's own son, Hazrat Zainul Abidin, was part of the Qafila, but it was Zainab who took the Qafila back home. And it was Zainab who stopped everywhere and spoke to multitudes and crowds about the whole story of Karbala. At that time, there was no media, there was no social media, there was no other way but Zainab, time and time again. So I feel that the reason that I'm speaking today is that I feel that this is the true face of Islam, and very few people understand it, or very few people even know about it. And if I can contribute even a little bit to it, then this is what I'm trying to do. So I'll just stop here.
Hello. Thank you, Syeda ji, for that. Since Kamla Bhasin is online now, I will request her to now come on board and finally share her thoughts.
So, first of all, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Zindabad, dosto. Secondly, both Feminist Multilogues and Sangat. We are overwhelmed by the response we have received to this. We've never had 3,000 plus registrations. And I feel maybe we should do a few more webinars on this theme. Now, everybody knows what an important role religion continues to play in our lives. I mean, I had thought when I was born 70 years ago that soon as education develops and as science develops, religions will become weaker and our lives will go on in a different direction. But today we see that religion has taken over my life in India much more than it had when I was born. I mean, today you cannot separate religion from politics. You cannot separate it from culture. You cannot separate it even from law. And as you just heard two women, two feminists speak, we have all totally different relationships with religion. And I personally feel that yes, religion can be a personal matter. We can all have a different relationship with it. But I'm one of those who believes that in the public life, religion should really not have a place. And I was so surprised when I went to Europe 50 years ago, and I saw how I thought religion was only a third world thing. Even today, friends, in almost all European countries, political parties are, religious political parties. In Germany, Catholic party, Christian party, this party, that party. In the White House, there is a church. Even when they go to bomb Vietnam, they do it in the name of God. And you know what is happening in South Asia in the name of religion. What is happening in India, what has happened in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka. A religion like Buddhism, what it has been in the name of religion, I really don't think it has anything to do with religion. So I'm very happy that we are engaging with these issues, and it'll really be good that in different fora we continue this discussion. Now, if Syeda believes in Islam, I mean, is there anything wrong? Is she hurting anybody? I don't think so. And I also know that throughout history, some women have used religion for freedom. And Uma gave us many examples. I mean, there are stories of Akka Mahadevi, there is the Lal Bear of Kashmir, there is Mirabai. And even in my life, I mean, you know, when women can't do anything else, they'll just go to a Sangat to go and do kirtan or something, the one way of getting out of the home. But we need to see also that how religion has put women down. I mean, I believe all the present day religions, in practice at least, do not give women equal rights, at least not in practice. And I think we need to engage with it as feminists. We can't shy away from a discussion on religion, how to deal with it. I don't think we can say that we can completely reject religion, because religion means a lot to a lot of people. So I think I will just stop here, and I can tell you that if you send us suggestions as to how to take this forward, we would like more people to speak about their religions, etc. But now I'll go back to Meenal and Diti to take us to the questions, and then we see Uma and Syeda responding to it. Thank you, Meenal.
Okay, so there has been a flood of questions in the chat box, and it's a little difficult to keep track of all of them. So we're trying to pick up some of those questions which we think should be answered, or if we have seen some questions coming up again and again. So let me start with some questions for Uma ji, since she went first. Some of the questions that we have come up with, one of the questions is, did patriarchy come with Hinduism around 2500 years ago? Yeah, so would you like to answer that, Uma ji?
No, I actually made the point that the emergence of patriarchy predates any systematic institutionalized religion that we are, which is contemporary. That is, predates long before. I mean, there is no Hinduism at that stage at all. What we call Hinduism is a much later phenomenon. It's before Buddhism, and certainly it's before Christianity and Islam. So patriarchy is, in a sense, a very early institution, which is part of the emergence of social relations, which includes, say, for instance, the state, which includes inequality between men and men in the form of institutionalized slavery, for instance, labor appropriation. So, in a sense, what is patriarchy? If you give it the simplest explanation, that is the inequality between men and women, institutionalized and supported by state and ideology, and something that actually privileges, in a sense, gives women a lower status in that society, whatever they might be doing. And this is before the emergence of institutionalized religion. So what I was trying to say is that when institutionalized religions emerge, they have to actually unfold their thinking and unfold their ideas in a situation where the sexual division of labor has come into existence and where inequality between men and women is already institutionalized. So what I was trying to say is that, therefore, for feminists, however we may see our own relationship to God, or to to the way in which you want to express your own spirituality, if you are part of institutionalized religion, you have to also deal with the way in which institutionalized religion is usually interpreted by men, and do not give the same access to women as you require interpretation. It's like, even today, I mean, whether it is Ramabai arguing against the Christian Thekadars, or it is Syeda claiming and holding on to the fact that, this is how she sees it. Essentially, institutionalized religion is usually interpreted by men. Interpreted and promoted and sustained and passed on to the next generation in a patriarchal society by men who dominate it in every sphere. They dominate it in politics, they dominate it in production, they dominate it in so many different ways. So that's what I was trying to say. So one has had to struggle. The feminist spirit has had to struggle against this apparatus, this inequality, and they've never given up. For me, the more important lesson is not that it's that they had a vision and they held on to it. They never gave up on that. The moment you have inequality, you have the critique of inequality. The moment you have patriarchy, you actually have the critique of patriarchy. So it is it is not accepted by everybody in society. Obviously, the power balance in society being what it is, ensures that the opinions of one section dominates over the other. So I want us to remember that institutionalized religious structures make it difficult for us to disengage, to take away the patriarchy from the structure, the religious structure also. And therefore the struggle has to be so, you have to constantly kind of reinterpret, reinterpret, and so on, which I think is an important job that we need to do. But that's the point I was trying to make. I hope that's clear now.
Thank you, Umaji. So I think I will continue this thread of the interpretation of religion and the ways in which that has affected and has the impact on women's lives. And I will continue this thread with Syeda ji and ask some questions of her, which have been raised in the chat box. Some of them I'm going to combine some of them together. For example, a lot of people have been asking that for her opinion on the separation of spaces in separation of spaces for worship in a mosque. Then somebody, another question is on the burqa, and if it is mentioned in the Quran interpretation. And the next again, the permission. Somebody has asked that hitting of women is permitted in Islam. So these are, I think, some questions that we can border under the interpretation of Islam, and then see. So Syeda ji, would you like to answer?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Meenal. Yeah, okay. These are very important questions, and I think that I was, I just want to read out one little thing to you, and this is again right out of the Quran. I'm reading it out of the Quran, which is the equality of the sexes. The verse is Surah 33, verse 35, and the surah is called Al-Ahzab. Men who surrender unto Allah, and women who surrender unto Allah. Men who believe and women who believe. Men who obey and women who obey. Men who speak the truth and women who speak the truth. Men who persevere in righteousness and women who persevere in righteousness. Men who are humble and women who are humble. Men who give alms and women who give alms. Men who fast and women who fast. And men who guard their modesty and women who guard their modesty. And men who remember Allah and women who remember Allah, Allah has prepared for them a great forgiveness and a great reward. You have heard the words of the Quran. And this, to me, the last thing about guarding the modesty, that is all that Quran says. And it is equally applicable to men and women. And again, to, following Kamla's instruction, the word of the Quran is, if I can translate it into Urdu, because Arabic I can't pronounce and nobody can understand. Mard aur aurat jo apni sharam gahon ki hifazat kare. That means they should guard their modesty. Now that interpreted as the burqa is totally an interpretation. It is not at all ordained. If modesty is ordained in Islam, so is modesty of dress ordained in every religion. And Islam's in the Quran, Quran says there were 124,000 prophets which were sent by Allah to guide humankind, and mentions Jesus and mentions Moses and so many prophets, and says we cannot mention everyone, but there are 124,000. And we have to realize which religion would say dress with immodesty. Now, if that is interpreted as, and I remember when I was in Women's Commission a long time ago, and there was in some parts of the country, women who were going without veils, they were throwing acid on their faces. And I did a whole seminar on how this thing was so repugnant, this action, because it was totally in contravention of the Quran and the belief in the Quran. And as far as separate spaces in the mosque is concerned, I remember when I'm a Kashmir born. So for me, Kashmir is like, Meri Janam Bhumi hai. So to me, it's I remember going right inside Hazrat Bal and looking and going right in Hazrat Bal and doing my Fatiha within the mosque. And always. And then few years ago, and I haven't been back in Kashmir for about 3-4 years now, but I remember being stopped from going in the sanctum sanctorum. So this is where the stranglehold of patriarchy have made these separate spaces for women. It is true that the Prophet had kept a time aside for women in his mosque, but that shows that status of women. So is there a need for separate spaces, or sometimes when cases have to be fought in the Supreme Court for women to enter Haji Ali, for example, or Hazrat Bal, these mosques? It's totally antithetical to what has been ordained in the Quran. As far as beating of women is concerned, the Quran says, and this has been it's been interpreted in such a adverse way that women are, the word of the Quran is that men are the garments of women and women are the garments of men, and they should treat each other with extreme tenderness. Now, garment is something which is close to your body. I think that kind of tender relationship between men and women is what has been continuously emphasized in Islam. So when Uma very rightly talks about all the patriarchal interpretations and why these religions have become such an anathema for some of the younger generation, and also for some of the older generation like me, is because we have made sure that it's the man's interpretation, it's the man's way of looking at religion. And somebody like Maulana Altaf Hussain Hali, who looked from the lens of women across the board, he was never regarded as one of the greatest poet philosophers of all times, because he threatened the existing order. So I think that really is, Umar very correctly said that the strings are always pulled by men. And women like me who become qazis, the only thing I can say is that they didn't do a fatwa against me. So, I mean, even that's a sort of a very minor kind of a victory, but yeah.
Thank you, Syeda ji. Another question, Syeda ji, if you could respond, since you are on the same track now. Another question is about polygamy and how did it come about, and provide a context of it maybe.
Yeah, I think again we go right back to the Quran in polygamy. And we have discussed it, Kamla and I have discussed it very often. I would have loved to discuss it with Uma, but we don't meet each other that often as much as I would like to. But the point was that at that time, women were inherited. Sorry, there's a sound. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So you're talking of polygamy, right? Meenal?
Yes, Syeda ji.
Okay. So as far as polygamy is concerned, that was a time when, to put it very simply, men married at random, 30, 40, 20, whatever, It was a free for all. Women were inherited like chattel. So but the Quran exactly says this. The Prophet, as we have been discussing among ourselves, he again calibrated the notion of polygamy. Instead of saying, no, you cannot only marry once and you cannot you cannot indulge in this kind of profligate multiple marriages. The Prophet said, and this is the Quran again, this is not again words of the Quran, you may take 1, 2, 3 or 4 wives. But there are 2 conditions. One is that you treat them with total equality without any discrimination. You have to treat them as equal. The second thing is, it is since it's human nature is that you cannot treat people in that egalitarian manner, it's better that you stay with one. And this is the word of the Quran.
Thank you, Syeda ji. I will now move on to the next question that I have picked for Uma ji. Uma ji, this is a very early question that came when you were talking. The question is, what would you say is the relationship between patriarchy, religion, and culture? And I mean, the relationship that exists in Hinduism, and if it is the same in the context of indigenous tribes?
You know what? Okay, let me. I'm muted or unmuted?
No, we can hear you, Uma ji.
Acha. So I actually think that you know, the structures are such that you can't actually separate and say in many traditions and many societies, this is religion, this is culture, this is patriarchy, as distinct from each other, because culture underpins both patriarchy and religion. Religion itself informs to some extent the manner in which that culture expresses itself. So I was talking about the a package which comes to us, and that structure is a very complex structure, and it is often something which is very convenient for us to turn around and say कि ये हमारी see, negative practices can immediately be attributed to हमारे tradition में ऐसा होता है, हमारी culture में ऐसा होता है, हमारे धर्म में ऐसा होता है, and it becomes something which can stop all arguments. I mean, then you have to close arguments and say, okay, this is a terrain that we can't go into because these are sacred spheres. So I was really talking about the fact. Now, this is part of the, I want to make a point which I think is implicit in some of the stuff that Syeda is also. What is religion? What could be religion? Religion can be institutionalized. Religion can also be faith. Religion can also be the relationship between you and the spiritual. It might be God. It might be some sense of the universe. It might be some sense of spirits of some. It could be anything. For instance, many tribal communities are animist. You know, they have a relationship with nature. They have a relationship with trees, with other aspects of the elements around you. What we now describe to be what we're treating as religion is actually institutionalized religions, which have a certain tradition, and they reproduce themselves in a certain kind of way. And those religious traditions often do not give you the space to create that relationship between yourself and the idea of the essence, you know, the real spiritual, the kind of thing that I was talking of some of the Buddhist bhikkhunis experiencing. I might also use the example, say, for instance, if my relationship or your relationship or Syeda's relationship or Kamla's relationship is with some sense of the non-material, beyond the material, some sense of the universal, some sense of things that cannot always be described. I mean, there's something about the spiritual which is very, you know, it is not easy to put in a box. Now that kind of space is available to you, which gets away from this structure which is somebody else is interpreting for you. You know, somebody else is determining it for you. I can choose the manner in which I express my spirituality. And there's so much of it. There's a lot of it that is available. I mean, when you listen to beautiful music, when you listen to beautiful bhakti music, or you listen to Sufi music, you are elevated. You know, you are taken into another sphere. It is, you know that it is beyond this world. And for me, that is something that will always be there, accessible for you. And that nobody can take away from you. And it is how you interpret. So in a sense, what constantly people are doing around you is to put you back into a box. ये धर्म है, ये उसके वसूल है, ये करना चाहिए, ये नहीं करना चाहिए. You know, and it doesn't leave you with the actual satisfying your inner spirit, which can be very eclectic and it can go anywhere. This interpretation part of it is very, very important, you know, to me. When you listen to, I'll give you the example of a beautiful composition that A.R. Rahman has done. It's called Zariya. It puts a Buddhist, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's beautiful. It's performed in Coke Studio. It's got a Buddhist monk, a bhikkhuni. It's got a Turkish singer, and it's got a whole group of young students, probably from A.R. Rahman school. And you know that A.R. Rahman himself is a very deeply spiritual person. They have put together this absolutely stunning performance and music, it's called Zariya. And actually, hum kya hain? Hum Zariya hain to experience something beyond the description, beyond the, and I find that extremely moving, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who actually are moved by it. It's the spiritual in religion that moves many people. Even for Syeda, it's the spiritual in religion that is moving her. That is something that is actually beyond the framework of what has been interpreted for us by the thekedars. For saying, ye hai, ye hai, ye hai. And the thekedars are not only men, it can also be a lot of women, because you circumscribe the boundaries and say, ye hai, iske aage piche nahi hai. So I think that, you know, whether it's Adivasi culture and all, and it's wonderful. I'll give you one last example, which maybe people will appreciate. There's this, there's a friend of ours, Kamla's also, her name is Nighat Bani. During the martial law regime in Pakistan, she was hauled up for her beliefs or so-called non-beliefs. And she was tipped off for it, you know, saying the martial law was asking her questions. And they asked her something and she said, that's between me and Allah. You don't come into the picture. You are not going to tell me. So in a sense, that is what the claim of the space is. So I don't think that the feminists really have a problem with anything that respects, that conforms to feminist thinking, feminist thought in all its richness. Will have no problem with a relationship, with you seeking some communication beyond the material self, beyond, you know, going into another realm. That's something that's always available to you. And to me, that is the essence. That is the essence of religion. That is the essence of spirituality. And that is what I would want us to, and that is in a space where it doesn't tell you, hate this person, isko maro, isko kato, isko ye karo. You know, that the problem with religion is it has become all of this. It has become a diktat for saying, this is how you will conduct yourself with this person. Take caste, for instance, in Hinduism. How do you disentangle it? How do you disentangle caste from religion? Fortunately, the bhakti, spiritual seekers, sort a way out, you know. So in a sense, you have to actually extract from that structure something that you pull out and you say, this is my journey. This is the journey that I'm going to go on to, you know. And I think that's very powerful. It's absolutely a very rich way in which one can see your relationship with things which are beyond perhaps easy grasping of the of what exists, right?
Okay, thank you, Umaji. In fact, the question was about something very specific, but you have really expanded on that. Yeah, so my next question, I think a lot of questions which are coming, especially for Syeda ji, are a lot of repetitions because she has answered the questions that you guys have raised about the particular issues that you were raising. So if you have any new questions, please leave them, but please don't repeat the same questions about the same things. Okay, so my next question is to both Uma ji and Syeda ji, that we have been since the beginning of the session only talking about men and women as binaries, men and women. Is there any religion that talks about diversity, a gender diversity? This is my question to both Uma ji and Syeda ji. And also, I think that also, and another question that I will club together so that you both can answer it together, is that, is there any religion, it has institutionalized sect, which you would say is close to egalitarian? Bhakti movement was not mainstream. So yeah, so any more mainstream? Yeah.
So, repeat the second question.
The second question was, is there any sect, institutionalized sect, that is close to egalitarianism?
Oh, Syeda, you want to answer that or shall I take it?
No, I mean, you go ahead, Uma, I'll follow you.
Okay. So the first part of it was the transgender, the question of gender, firm gender identities. Isn't that right? The fixity of gender identities.
Yes.
You know, actually, if men
and women,
the experience is quite rich in different institutions. It's quite different religious traditions. It can be quite rich. For instance, the concept of in mythology, you will find it, at least, even if you don't find it in religion. You know, so in mythology, there's a lot of the bringing together of the two binaries, the opposites of male and female, and to reconcile it in a certain kind of way. Even the concept of Ardhanarishvara is actually part male, part female. These are conceptual, maybe. And in the Buddhist text, there are a lot of stories that might indicate that there's not enough research that's been done on it, but I think this is something that can be explored, and it is the hardness of that questions of sexuality, I think, get unfixed a little bit as you go into different traditions. And, you know, I mean, institutionally, you have made space for transgenders in a certain kind of way. So there is also, but there is always a power behind it, and there's always also certain amount of laying down the rule. And there's also family policing and everything, which will ultimately, now that may not have religious authority, but it will have the weight of authority of culture and tradition in a certain kind of way. So I think that the space is available. It has to be actually again pushed and explored and fought for and got. I mean, there's this chap, what's his name, Devdutt Patnaik, who does that thing, you know. He's constantly talking about those examples. So I'm sure that if you look at it, and I know that in Buddhism there are stories that approximate to same-sex possibilities. So I think there's that. In the second part of the question, which I really wanted to deal with, what did you say? The second part of the question?
Yeah, I think first, Syeda ji, do you want to add anything to the first question?
Yeah, I just want
gender diversity.
There are two things I want to say. Two sides of this, what the question that you raised. One is that, you know, in the Quran, there is this story of Prophet Lot and the story of two places. One was Sodom and one was Gomorrah. And it's also in the Bible and it's also in the Quran. And that is considered to be the Islam's condemnation of same-sex. That story of Prophet Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, which you can read up. I'm not going to narrate the story to you. That is one aspect of it. Then there is another aspect of it, and Kamla and I, we hold a class in Persian poetry and Urdu poetry every day, 6 days a week. And today we were discussing is, you know, this whole Sufi love that is always a same-sex love, whether it is Shams Tabriz and Maulana Rum, whether it is Hazrat Amir Khusro and Nizamuddin Aulia, whether it is Sarmad Shaheed. When you reach that ecstasy of love, it is your beloved becomes identified with God. So that is the Sufi aspect of it. The third thing, which to me is overarching on this, and that's the last point I'll make, is Allah primarily is Rahman and Rahim. Thousands of times in the Quran you hear the word Allah is Rahman and Allah is Rahim. Allah is forgiving, Allah is Kareem. Allah is, sometimes you read the word Allah is Qahar and Jabbar, which means, very angry and a very oppressive God. But that is very rare, the use of the word. So when the overwhelming sentiment of the religion is that religion is Rahman and Rahim, how do you understand that in the context of the story of Prophet Lot? And how do you understand it in the context of this whole Sufi philosophy, which in a sense is ultimately the love of two men is like a love of God when everything else is obliterated. It's the ultimate in Ishq. And I think Kamla can come in here because we have discussed it quite a lot in our, among ourselves. Kamla?
Meenal?
Yes, Kamladi.
Are there other important questions? Because Syeda has already said what I would have said on this particular one.
Okay.
But I don't want to take other people's time.
There are actually a few more questions.
That second one, Meenal, the second part of the question, that was important.
So the second question was, is there any religious sect which truly egalitarian? And the asker of the question has already said that Bhakti movement was not mainstream, so that doesn't count.
Yeah, actually, I think the way in which the question has been posed indicates the struggle of those who claim equality within an unequal world. See, Bhakti may have begun with a attempt at trying to break the barriers. Okay, all Bhakti traditions were trying to reconcile. Take Kabir, for instance. Kabir is trying to reconcile the difference between Hindus and Muslims. Guru Nanak, it draws from both traditions when he creates Sikhism. So both Islam and from Hinduism. So you'll find that attempts were made to reconcile what appeared to be the irreconcilable. And these were very rich experiments, okay? In Maharashtra, the Dalit communities have very rich tradition of creating bhakti poetry, which is very egalitarian, which is seeking, saying, why is the God not accessible to us? And there's the story of the Chokhamela, who is trying to worship the God is not available to him. He goes and stands on the side window, and the God turns, that is the idol turns to face him so that he can be given the darshan. So there are all these stories which are very rich, but the fact of the matter is none of this survives. And that brings me to a very important question. I'll probably be slaughtered by everybody, but see, the fact of the matter, even Bhakti, Akkamahadevi, she throws off her clothes, right? There's Basavanna, who's anti-caste. What happens to the Lingayat community? It becomes another caste. It becomes another sect. And then it simply reproduces itself like that. It becomes as oppressive as anything else. Then they police the tradition. And they don't let you do what that generation of people managed to achieve. Now, so for me, it's very important that, new ideas will remain either fringe or they'll get incorporated into mainstream, because social relations never get touched. Inequality remains in the world outside. If inequality remains in the world outside, what will happen to the radical ideas that you put out? They will get domesticated. They will get sanitized. They will get actually appropriated within the mainstream. And today the Lingayats are among a fairly oppressive set of diktats in which they rule over people. So in a sense, the experiments that we've made have been very rich, but we must also learn that वो structure को हम आज के दिन उसी तरह से नहीं, we cannot reappropriate it back like that. You will have to struggle to create the egalitarian structures all over again, in which case all of this stuff will help us. All of this will help us because it will say to us that हमारी imagination को तुम रोक नहीं पाए. अब उस imagination, उस experience को, we will have to reconstruct a society in which those inequalities actually go away. And only then will we actually be able to answer some of the questions that we are dealing with today. My relationship with God, if it is constantly got to be mediated by somebody who will tell me this is right, this is wrong, because he has the power to tell me, or he has the power to authorize caste, how long will I be able to stand over there? You know, at the end of the day, I will get martyrdom. Kabhi logic wahin se aata hai na. You are martyred, you hold on to your opinion, and it is not something that necessarily can succeed. So I think unless the pool of thinking expands and more people move in the direction of accepting this egalitarianism, and not only on gender ground, but also on caste and class and other grounds, how will we actually create a real egalitarian spiritual society, you know, spiritualized society? I'm not sure. That's the challenge before us.
Thank you, Umaji. Syeda ji, would you like to add something?
I just want to recite two couplets about the essence of what I understand Islam, and I say it with again a smile on Kamla's face, which I love, and that is Islam is essentially service of others. And Dr. Allama Iqbal says, खुदा के बंदे तो हैं हजारों, बनों में फिरते हैं मारे मारे. खुदा के बंदे तो हैं हजारों, बनों में फिरते हैं मारे मारे. मैं उसका बंदा बनूंगा जिसको खुदा के बंदों से प्यार होगा. This is the teaching of the Prophet. I will be devoted to one who loves humanity. And the other one I want to quote is Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia, who said, and it's in Farsi, so I'll have to explain it to you. We discussed it in our class, and that is Ibadat Bajuz Khidmate Khalq Neest, which means prayer without serving humanity means nothing. But Ibadat Bajuz Khidmate Khalq Neest, bas tasbih sajjado dalq neest. Praying is not having the beads, it's not having the prayer mat, it's not wearing a cloak. It is service of humanity. And this was the lesson of the Prophet. This is the lesson of the Quran. And within this whole rubric of Rahman and Rahim, we have to understand what Islam is really all about.
Thank you, Syeda ji. We've come towards the end of this session. I don't think we'll be taking any more questions. I would like Kamla di to please say what she wanted to say.
I once again want to thank all those who joined us. I mean, 500 on this group, plus I think many more on the Facebook. Of course, my heartfelt, not thanks, I would celebrate our solidarity with Uma and Syeda for coming here. I mean, we can't thank anybody because we don't own the women's movement. But I really feel that we need to continue to challenge any religious tradition which demeans women. For example, these days a lot of talk is going on about menstruation. And you know, these things are done in the name of religion. I mean, nobody knows whether originally the religion said that or not. I mean, all that which goes on in Nepal and in India, in Pakistan, about menstruation. I mean, so completely stupid. And it is also entered, I don't know originally whether it was there or not, it is now in South Asian Christianity and it is in South Asian Islam. that if you're menstruating, you can't do rosa, you can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, for God's sake, if God's sake, bichare, God kahan se aa gaye, sorry. I mean, if her menstruation is impure, then please bring me one human being who is pure, because nobody has come to this earth without coming through us, through our blood. So such things we need to continue to challenge. And unfortunately, I can only talk of Hinduism. As soon as we are born, religion comes in. During marriage, it comes in. During death, it comes in. And it comes at times when we are very emotional. So if my mother dies, I'm a feminist. I want to do the last rites. But at that time, I mean, do I want to fight my feminist battles? And we normally give in. But there are women who didn't. For example, I did perform my mother's last rites. And I think, and nobody stopped me. I mean, the Panditji tried to tell me, Benji, please go back. All I had to tell him was, Panditji, do you want your 500 rupees or you don't? And the man backed off for 500 rupees. So you see how deep their religion is. And of course, as feminists, we need to continue to fight against bringing religion into politics. And religion has always been used. The colonial masters came to our countries with a sword in one hand and the Bible in the other hand. So they have always used these things, and I think we need to challenge it. But personal choice as a feminist, when we are talking of all kind of diversities among us, how can we deny anyone to follow any religion which he or she or they want to follow? But I do think we need many, many more discussions. We even need discussions to get more information. What does Quran Sharif say? What does Hinduism say? What does the Bible say? Even at that level, we need to do it. So as Sangat and also as part of the Feminist Multilogues, I'm inviting each one of you to write to us and tell us if you have other ideas of more webinars on this theme, plus other themes. Because we are finding that no seminar would have got us to 500 people plus across our national boundaries and borders. So there are many things which we are learning even in this tragic lockdown. So please do come, and I really do want to appreciate Meenal and Diti and Nidhi from the Sangat office and all the Feminist Multilogue coordinators for organizing it so well. And big hugs, even in the Corona time, I don't care. Social distancing, we have never believed in, but even physical distancing, I would give up now and would give a hug to Uma and to Syeda. And let's continue these dialogues. And, you know, today we are discussing religion, but we could also have been discussing feminism. And people have been telling us how feminism has not practiced equality, how women like me have not given enough attention to Dalit issues, to issues of transgenders and queer people. So wherever there is an organization, wherever there is a group, power dynamics comes in. And the only feminist principle I know is that we have to keep questioning this power dynamics. And friends, for me, if a religion does not practice love, according to my definition of religion, that is not a religion. If any religion talks of hatred, I mean, by my definition, it is not religion. And unfortunately, we see around us, today religion is more about hatred, more about, power. I mean, nothing else. Mr. Trump picks up a Bible last week and goes and stands in front of a church to woo his followers. And we see this all the time. So let's continue these discussions. And as in Sangat, we have this slogan, not love of power, power of love. Let's continue to spread that power of love, love of knowledge, love of logic, love of not just dialogues, but as we call it, multilogues. So we celebrate our solidarity. And back to you, Meenal.
First of all, I would like to thank wholeheartedly Syeda ji and Uma ji for giving us so much time, for bearing with us through technological logistics and everything else that comes with it. So thank you all. You have been really patient, and finally we have all been successful. So that's great. So yeah, thank you for very much for your time and for being so willing to participate in this. Yeah, so that's what, and thank you everybody who has joined us today. Yes, a recording of this session will be available. I have sent the link to our Facebook page where a recording of the session will be available on the chat box. But you can also, I will tell you right now, you can follow us on Facebook. We are very easily identifiable. Just type in Sangat Network, we'll come. And that's where you'll find this link. And like Kamla said, please write into us, give us your feedback. We don't have a feedback link for this session. You can give us your feedback on our email. Again, I have written it on the chat box, but I will tell it here right now, sangat.sangat@jagori.org. So that's where you can write to us. And yes, please, a lot of you have been asking this question. So I'm going to clarify this once and for all. No, we do not give certificates for any webinars that you attend. So no, we will not be giving out certificates for this one also. And once again, thank you for attending. Write to us on our email, reach out to us on our Facebook, and that's all. Thank you, everyone. I will be now ending this session. Thanks. Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.